Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad you are here with us, and just by showing up today, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I'm pleased to feature two of the smartest, most interesting, and outspoken music industry people I know, and I promise you will leave today smarter and more inspired than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people in the amazing work they do day to day in the business. The second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I'm a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and please make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the session. And please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this series free. Special thanks to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, MedJet, Tennessee Brewworks, Project Music, and Cushmasters. So let's get down to business. Today, we welcome back Doc Searls. Doc is a veteran journalist and author called by Thomas L. Friedman of the New York Times one of the most respected technology writers in America. Best known as co-author of the landmark Clue Train Manifesto, Doc is also author of The Intention Economy, When Customers Take Charge, which describes work he began in 2006 as a fellow with the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, and which continues today as Project VRM, which fosters development of tools that increase personal agency in the digital world. He's also a fellow at the Center for Information Technology and Society at UC Santa Barbara, and a visiting scholar with the Ostrom Workshop at Indiana University. A frequent keynote speaker at conferences, Doc also co-organizes the Internet Identity Workshop twice yearly at the Computer History Museum, and hosts the podcast Floss Weekly for the Twit Network. Welcome, Doc. So glad to have you back here.
I'm glad to be here. I forget that, my bio is that long.
That's not long at all.
And when you're talking about the smartest people in the room, I'm one of those people that looks around to see who those are, because I tend not to include myself among them. I'd rather be among others. But
well,
yeah,
you
thanks for
are
having me.
Absolutely delighted to have you back. And joining Doc for today's discussion is Michael Robertson. Michael has a 25-year history as a technology entrepreneur. He founded the digital music pioneer MP3.com, which championed MP3 to the world. He galvanized the nascent MP3 industry by hosting the MP3 Summit, selling the first MP3 player in the world, and creating the world's largest digital music library of free music, all while overcoming obstacles, including lawsuits from the major labels, before achieving a level of vindication by selling MP3.com to Vivendi Universal. Michael has never shied away from taking on giants with transformative ideas. With Gizmo 5, he brought free phone calls to the world by using SIP standard before eventually selling that company to Google. He took on the Microsoft desktop monopoly with a point and click Linux desktop operating system called Windows, which had the very first visual app store called Windows. Nowadays, you'll find him working on Zoom Quarter, a video robot to attend and record video meetings like this one, and an upcoming project called Webinar TV, which turned the world of webinars into a Twitch-like experience, creating a whole new media experience. For fun, Michael trains wild Mustangs and donkeys and has a hobby YouTube channel called Scammies. Michael, it is such a pleasure to have you here. I've wanted you as a guest for a long time, so welcome to both of you. Please take it away, boys.
Thanks, Tom.
So Michael, I say waiting for us to show up at each other's lunch here, because that's sort of the framing for this. Well, first, let me ask what your background is. Explain your background there. Mine is a basement, so there's not much I can do with that. I Zoom killed all of my background, so I don't know where those are. So I can't top you with that. What's going on there?
So I live in San Diego, and this is northeast San Diego County. So not what people think about normally when San Diego, but it's a big, beautiful ranch, probably one of the biggest ranches left in San Diego County. And I didn't grow up a country boy. I grew up as a inner city kid. But I've taken to country life quite a bit, and so now I have some wild Mustangs which I break, and donkeys, and one of the things I do is I do an Airbnb Experiences. Have you heard of those?
No,
It's like
not at all.
Airbnb is for like the hosting part, right? You find
Yeah.
places to stay, and that's fantastic. Well, Airbnb has another part called Experiences. And
Huh.
those are like events, activities that you do. And I actually do several. I do one with wild Mustangs, one with donkeys, and one with mini horses. So people sign up for that, come out here, and I get to show them the crazy world of equines. And so I actually do like 2 of those a week. So it keeps
Wow.
me interfacing with a lot of people out there.
And you do this
it's
personally? I
fun.
mean, you
Yeah,
host the people, you
it's
meet with them,
me.
and
That's right.
they come break this Mustang and try not to get your teeth kicked in or something. How does that
Yes,
go?
yes. Well, it's funny you should mention that, because I had my tooth kicked out by a mule.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
true story. Yeah, that was only like 2 years ago. Yeah, so it's a little dangerous, but that's why it's interesting, right?
So you have mules there too? Is that
We
part of
do,
your?
we do, right? A mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. And so first I started with wild Mustangs. They're running all over the United States. There's like 60,000 of them. The government has to round them up because there's so many, and there's not natural predators that maintain the population. And they try to get people to adopt them. They only adopt out like 2,000 or 3,000 a year out of 60,000. So it's a drop in the bucket. And the reason why is because a wild Mustang doesn't really like humans, isn't obviously trained, so it's not worth a lot of money. And so it's hard. It's a hard sell. You pay $150 and you're probably overpaying at $150, but it's a fun challenge to try to tame them. And I do a certain type of it called natural horsemanship. So old school, like country guys would tie their feet up and ride the buck out of them and stuff like that. That's sort of the old school way. And there's a whole new generation of horse trainers that are called natural horsemen that try to get into the brain of the horse a little bit and try not to use more force than you have to. And so there's some fantastic videos. You should guys go look on YouTube.
You're a Mustang whisperer then, doing that stuff.
I'm a Mustang whisperer in training. Yeah, and I have missing teeth to prove it.
It's this is completely off topic, I suppose, or it could be, but because horses are, as we know them, are not native to North America. They're brought over by the Spanish during their invasion 500 years ago. Were those Mustangs they brought over? Were those the original Spanish horses, or are Mustangs like some wild outcome of matings of many different kinds of horses? I have no idea.
This is farmers just lost their horses, right? You lose a male horse, you lose a female horse, bam, you got a herd. Right.
Yeah.
So these, as you mentioned, all of them, eventually are, from the Spanish, but, you might have an Arabian meeting a quarter horse. You might have a draft horse with so they're all different shapes and sizes, but they're just escaped from farmers.
So they're the kind of like the mutts of horses in a
Yes,
way.
exactly. Right. But mutts are genetically very sturdy. So mutts maybe get a little bit bad views sort of in the dog world, but actually mutts are far genetically sturdier than the purebreds. And it's the same with horses.
That's interesting. I was once at a dog training, like a dog, what do you call it? They're not huskies, but the dogs that pull sleds, the sled dog racing things, right? And it was a training center for them, and none of them were huskies. They were all just kind of various dogs, and they were just like, well, these are good at this because we selected them out, and they're not what you'd think. I mean, they're obviously they're not dachshunds, but they're larger dogs that were, they found to be sturdy and I guess could take the cold. So let's go backwards in time. What are you doing now? We got Tom gave us a little sampler. You're doing something different all the time. I can't keep up. So give us what's revving your jets at this moment.
Well, I built when COVID hit, I built a video robot called Zoom Quarter, which logs into video meetings for you. Like I actually told it to log into this meeting and record it and send you the video. Because you don't want to be beholden to a schedule. It's fine if you have a one-on-one meeting, but if it's just a group meeting or a staff meeting or a city council meeting, the last thing you want to do is be stuck in front of your computer. So I wrote this little video robot. And people can go sign up for it and use it, and it's fun. It's a paid subscription. And then I had this idea, like, you know what? I did some little napkin math, and I determined there's 10 million webinars that happen every year, maybe more. I don't know, but that's just some napkin math, right? But they're impossible to find because they all happen in little places, and they email their little mailing lists and stuff like that. So I built a search engine. We're now capturing about 10,
so your
20...
index, you've got the index for all the webinars that people don't know are there, but it's kind of like the Google for those.
That's
Is that right?
That's
Okay.
right. And we built a little AI engine that tries to categorize them. And we're going to launch in July Webinar TV. And what Webinar TV is if Twitch married Zoom and had a baby, that's what Webinar TV is. Right? You go there and it shows you every webinar happening in the world, the ones that we know about, of course. And you can say, oh, I want to watch this one, or, oh, record that one.
But if it's searchable, then it's there, then you can find it, right?
That's right.
So I can imagine many exits for that. So I wish you the best in making that thing happen. It's interesting. So let me get to a topic I think is maybe even a theme for where you're coming from, which is that what we want in the digital age is optionality. Every human being wants as many options as they can, as they, this applies to radio, it applies to all the sites we go to, it applies to our time, especially. I mean, there's so many things. Time is the one thing we have to spend. We have no choice about it, but we want maximized optionality around that. Is that a theme for you? Or, I mean, whether it's conscious or not, is that one of the gating factors you look at when you're trying to imagine out what you're going to be doing next, or where an opportunity might lie?
I sometimes I look at all these people that do all this deep thinking and it's not how I approach the world. I'm much more pragmatic. I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. I'm a big freedom guy, right?
Yeah.
Anybody that wants to,
I know that. That's one reason why I asked that.
Limits, I reject, and I say, let people decide. Don't hurt other people. Don't take their stuff, but let people decide. But I think there's, if you want to be a maverick, if you want to change the world, you have to flaunt rules. You have to say, well, I know that's the rule, but I don't think that's the way the world should be. And so that's kind of how I approach. So I guess that is optionality. I've never thought about it in that sort of academic, abstract manner. But I remember going back to mp3.com, when I started mp3.com, there was a lot of thing like, oh, you need to focus just on pop music or just on, hip hop or, just one genre. And I'm like, no, we're going to have all music, and by all music, I mean, every person who wants to submit a song, we allowed on the website. I mean, you could fart arm fart the Star Spangled Banner and we would allow it. And all the music people are like, that's crazy. That's insane. You're just going to have just junk. And I'm like, music is so subjective. What you think is great, I might think sucks, And so part of it was like, let the market decide. We'll accept everything. And I will tell you that there's one little twist on that. I listen intently to criticism. People think I don't listen to criticism, but I actually do, because I go home and I think, are they right? And sometimes they are right. Right. And one of the criticisms of mp3.com when I started it, because we were like, hey, we'll accept any artist as long as it's your music and you didn't steal it from somebody or copy it from somebody else without their permission, we'll accept it. And they said, well, you're just going to have piles and piles of junk. And I said, yeah, well, I have piles of junk, but you have to have piles of junk to get the diamonds, right? You got to dig through a lot of dirt to get the diamonds. And they said, yeah, but you're going to have so much dirt, no one's going to be able to find the diamonds.
Yeah.
And that was one criticism that I'm like, that's kind of right, So I got to make a system that self-organizes somehow, that raises those diamonds, makes it easier to find them. And this is way back in 1998, right? So this is in the early days of the internet. And like, what if we built a system that looked at what people did? What did they listen to the whole song? Did they, stop after 5 seconds? Did they recommend it to their friend? Did they download it? And I use all this data to organize the website to rank every song in every genre and every subgenre on the website. And so that's what we did. And what's fascinating is that it kind of worked. It wasn't perfect, but it kind of worked. It wasn't like, super sophisticated AI or anything like that. It was just using data points to, categorize. But it did something that was so profound that really made mp3.com. And what it did is it turned the whole site into a competition. Because if you think about that, that band they do Southern jazz blues, right? That's their area, because at first we started with big genres, and then we subdivided them into a million little times. And we had a, Southern jazz blues genre on mp3.com. And I would get an email from artists saying, I'm number 6 in Southern jazz blues, in this little tiny, subgenre. And so by turning everything into a ranking system, it made it a competition. It made it almost a game. And it turned every artist into a marketing engine for mp3.com. It wasn't the intent. I didn't do it. So they said, well, they'll really want to be first. So they'll put their URL everywhere, or they'll tell their friends, or they'll mention us in their concerts, or put us on their flyers. I didn't appreciate that at the time, right? I appreciate it looking back. But it was really one of those profound moments where I listened to criticism. I'm like, that's true, and I changed what we did. And it turned out to be a really key element of MP3's success.
Let's talk a little bit about what the music industry was at the time when you showed up in it with mp3.com, and how it both fought that and also adapted to it, and where it's gone now, because now we have a bunch of streaming services and their subscriptions, and it's not something I would have forecast exactly at that time. I imagined where basically the whole thing got enclosed by a few big companies. And I'm wondering, what's your perspective on that, and kind of trace the history of where you were involved with that, and where do you think it is now and where it's going? But especially with, I'd like to look back at, I think looking at what they did with copyright, that the music industry was actually ahead of the game in wanting to stop a lot of the kind of things that other people thought was progress on the internet.
Well, I think so first of all, to understand mp3.com, you have to set the background to understand what did the world look like in 1997?
Yeah.
And the answer was there was no music available online. Everyone typically had a modem, which were really slow. The top of the line was 56K. A lot of businesses didn't have internet. So bandwidth was really constrained. You might find some sites that had 30-second clips of bands in maybe real audio format, which sounds very staticky for those of you young people that are out there. So it was a desert. There was nothing. So when I started mp3.com, the math I did was so simple, Doc. It was like, okay, there's nothing right now, because the majors were boycotting the internet. They feared it. At the time, they're making so much money selling CDs that any change, they were like, no, we don't want that. So I knew they were never going to participate, at least not in the near term, with the internet. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to go get all the unsigned artists, because the difference between nothing and something is enormous, right? So I didn't have Madonna, but I had the next Madonna, the wannabe Madonnas. I had those. And so that's one of the really key elements that made mp3.com successful, was the majors' reluctance to put anything online. they gave me a monopoly,
Mm-hmm.
because my deal with artists at mp3.com, for those people who don't know, because it's ancient history now, is that I was like, I drove my busted up Honda up to LA. I lived in San Diego at the time, and talked to the major record labels. And to my credit, one day of meeting with the major record labels, I'm like, those guys will never work with us. Never.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't spend 1 second trying to court them, which made me the opposite of pretty much every music startup, right? Who tried to, kiss their ring to try to get their goods. And I said, I'm just going to go find artists who aren't part of the major record labels. And what could I give them? Well, I said, you know what I'm going to give them? I'm going to give them a website, because in 1997, people forget this. If you wanted a website, you had to hire a HTML programmer, right? You had to go pay a hosting company. It was really complex. I'm like, all right, I'm going to give every artist free website. All they have to do is give me one song for free, a complete song, the whole thing. And even though, people, the music industry poo-pooed it and said, no one's going to download a song. It takes 20 minutes to download a whole MP3 song, a 3 megabyte song. No one's going to do that. And I'm like, you're wrong, because the difference between nothing and something is huge, and so that's what we did. And here's a little curious fact. Those artists that sign up at mp3.com, I said, hey, you got to give me one complete song to give away for free. And then I'll give you all this web hosting for free, no charge, unlimited bandwidth, unlimited storage. I'll give you stats, everything. On average, they would give me 5 songs for free, not one. And I always ask people, which song do you think they gave me? They gave me their best songs. They're not their worst songs, right? You wouldn't give them the worst songs and say, hey, check out my site, and there's all this, my crappiest music are there. No, you got to impress your fans. So they actually would self-select their best songs and give me those for free. And that's how we grew to be, the largest digital music company in the world, with no music from the major record labels. Now, your second question was, did you see the Spotify of the world coming? I actually did, and I built something, and I see a question in here in the chat about why we got sued. Because we got sued and for, I don't know, 400 million, and we lost the lawsuit. And here was the math that I did. I knew everything was going to the cloud, but in 1999, there was a real problem. Nobody had any bandwidth. And so the notion was, well, you're going to buy all your songs digitally. And I'm like, but wait a second. I already have all the songs that matter in this stack of CDs to me. So there might be future songs I'm interested in, but the songs that I already love, that I already know, I already have the CD. But how do I get these CDs up to the cloud? That was like a real technical problem, And so then I had this epiphany, like, wait a second, every CD is the same. If you have Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill and I have it, it's all the exact same bits. So what if I pre-digitize all the CDs in the world? And then when Doc proves to me that he has that Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill by putting it into his CD-ROM drive and letting me read the audio, random parts of the audio, I will then activate those songs immediately in the cloud for them. And that's what we built. It was a brilliant system. It was so magical. You could take a CD, pop it in, and in 20 seconds, all the songs were in your cloud locker, even over the slowest modem. But we got sued, and their argument was, well, you made a database in advance using our CDs, using our copyrights. You made a copy without a license, and therefore you're a copyright infringer. And we lost the lawsuit, and it's really a shame, because we were trying to make CDs more valuable, not less. You had to have the physical CD to be able to activate it, right? If you didn't have the physical CD, you couldn't activate it. You couldn't download any of the songs. They were very low quality, by the way. I think when we launched, it was 32K, which sounds, barely listenable, because people had modems, right? So I couldn't do, 56 or 128K because people couldn't have a streaming experience then. So I definitely saw that everything was moving to the cloud. And I thought the shortcut was this interim way of beam it, we called it, we could beam all your CDs to the cloud, but it didn't work out.
But you're still able to leverage mp3.com, right? If you sold it, or trying to remember exactly what the outcome of that was.
So Universal Music sued me, right? And it was in New York, because that's where they do copyright lawsuits because you have very friendly judges there to the media companies. And it was fascinating, Doc, because I would literally go to a court hearing and their attorney would get up and I'm sitting there in the defendant's well, and they would say, Your Honor, this guy's a rebel. He doesn't think the laws apply to him. He doesn't respect the law. He doesn't think your authority matters, and you need to punish him. And then we would go to lunch, and honest to God, these guys would go, okay, well, how much do you want to sell for? I'm like, wait a second. I thought 30 minutes ago I was the devil incarnate, you know? And that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that I have from that whole thing is that to the unsophisticated who haven't, been in big business and big battles, lawsuits about right and wrong, right? It's about, hey, I was backing out of the parking lot and then you hit me, and no, I was sitting still, and, and somebody was right and somebody was wrong. That's what lawsuits are. But to big business, lawsuits are just about business maneuvering. It's about, hey, can I get leverage on this guy? I don't really think he's bad. That's just stuff I say to the judge to try to win my case. And so the company that sued me the most was Universal Music, who then bought my company in 2001. So Vivendi Universal bought mp3.com and I sold it. So I haven't had anything to do with mp3.com since 2001.
And then what did they do with it? And did they get you with it in any way?
I agreed to work for a small time, 6 months to a year. I was smart enough even back then to know that entrepreneurs don't work well in big companies, right? The mindset is different, and so sadly they destroyed it and shut it down, turned it off. It's a real travesty personally, because it's really an early part of internet history.
Am I wrong? They could have had Spotify had they been smart about it.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they used all my engineers because I had built this fantastic engineering team. And when I say I built, they came to work at mp3.com. mp3.com was like the sexy startup. So we would get people that would leave Silicon Valley to come to San Diego to work for mp3.com. So we had all these great engineers, but it wasn't because I had a magnetic personality. It was because mp3.com was a cool place, right? It was digital music. It was fun. We were rebels. And so my team built Press Play. So when the Press Play was sort of the music industry endorsed Spotify. And so they built it. And, they could have been Spotify, but what I've learned about business is that businesses know what businesses know, meaning major record labels, they know how to sign an act, how to get them on, the Tonight Show, how to get their buy off the radio stations and get their songs in rotation and manufacture stars. That's what they know. When it comes to the internet, they don't know the internet. And when they had the keys to mp3.com, they crashed that car into the wall as fast as you could possibly do. Why? Not because they're stupid, but because the world's a big freaking place, right? With just, if I had to go run a record label, at best, I'd probably do a mediocre job, and I might screw that up too. Why? Because I know internet stuff. I know technology. It's a different beast. And I do have respect for that now. That there are so many different sectors of business, and just because you're good in one area doesn't mean that's going to translate. And I think that's especially true when it comes to technology. I mean, like, tell me what big company has gone from non-tech to tech? Where are they? I mean, I'm sure some exist, but all the big companies, they just started tech, right? The big tech companies, they just started tech, transforming from the physical world of bits, of atoms to bits, is probably an impossible, transition.
Or even one kind of tech to another. If your specialty is, if you're IBM, I mean, IBM, the exception with IBM is maybe the PC, but that was actually a rebel group that they had themselves. They ended up closing it down, and the clones won, and Apple won, and others won. I'm thinking. I noticed, by the way, Debbie Newman's in the chat. She worked as Press Play as VP marketing, which is, she didn't know you had anything to do with that. That's rather cool. There's speaking of the record companies, I once had a I was at a little collection of people that Harvard had pulled together for kind of a closed meeting to try and settle things it's sort of in the late Napster era, something like that. And the thing I paid close attention to at that time was what the DMCA, which came out while you had mp3.com and was probably partly addressed against it by the record companies. That's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. One of the things they did in that was leave open negotiations between webcasters and the record and the companies on how royalties would be sorted out. Eventually, copyright royalty boards and other things like that kind of came up with something that the Spotifys and the rest of them could live with. But there was a guy there from NBC Universal, whatever it was called at the time, who told me, "Oh yeah, we wrote that. I wrote that part. I wrote that whole part of that thing. And oh yeah, we write model legislation and we give it over to the Congress, and then they write that." So I think both of us are of a similar mind on new regulation in general. Mine being a techie is kind of like every new tech law kind of protects yesterday from last Thursday, and then we have to have it for the next 50 or 100 years. I'm wondering what would you do to either unwind existing law or write something that really opens things up for entrepreneurs and for people who aren't just consumers, but the great thing about the internet is that everybody's original. Look at the music industry. I mean, it's completely exploded because all of the artists are independent. They're more independent now than ever. That's what the internet did. It's sort of like, here's this great peerage. We're all peers in this thing. We can all participate one way or another. What would you do to, I mean, if you were to write or take down either write model legislation or take down what, what's already up there, what would you,
Well, first I have a Debbie Newman story. She's in
oh,
chat.
great. She's
Yes,
in the chat.
I don't know if she remembers this, but I've been sued a bunch of times because if you're involved in digital music, you're going to get sued. That's just part of it. And she would show up and watch the hearings and the trial. And it was at one trial, one of the times I've been sued, we break for lunch and I see Debbie there and I go up to her and I say, hey, how's it going? No, great. I said, what do you think? And she's like, you're not doing well. And I'm like, oh crap, we're toasted. And we ended up losing that lawsuit. I can't remember which one it was, but I remember her telling me that because I'm like, oh man, if we didn't get Debbie Newman, who's very objective, quiet, observer, very astute observer. I'm like, oh boy, but anyways, beside that, but I will tell you, here was an eye-opening experience that I had when it comes to laws and copyright. So the time is 1999. Universal Music has sued mp3.com. They've won, some of the early rulings, and so there were damages, and we're fighting over damages, and so I go to Congress, right, and I hire a PR company who we can get you a meeting with Senator Orrin Hatch, we can get you a meeting with this representative and that representative and stuff like that. So I go to DC and I'm meeting with these representatives, and it's the morning. I meet with 2 or 3 and I explain what we're doing. I explained, hey, we digitize CDs in advance. We don't give away the music unless they already have the CD. And so it's a travesty that we were found liable for anything. We're actually helping the music industry. Well, I get a phone call from my president and he's like, hey, because he was back in San Diego. He goes, you got to stop saying what you're saying. And I'm like, I'm just meeting in representatives' office and senators' offices, right? And I'm meeting sometimes with their staff, sometimes with them. And I was explaining our situation. And he says, you got to stop saying what you're saying because Warner Music has heard about it. And we're trying to settle with those guys, settle this lawsuit where we had already been found to be liable for damages. And we're trying to settle. And if you keep saying that, and the next day I was going to speak in public in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, right? And they're like, if you keep saying that, they're not going to settle with us. Now, the the takeaway here is that I'm meeting with the staff of the representative. I'm walking out of the office and they're picking up the phone and they're calling the media companies and telling them what I'm saying. That's what kind of pipeline there is between lawmakers and businesses, and lawmakers and corporate interest, and lawmakers and not really constituents, but lobbyists, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I don't think it's possible to make legislation that is balanced, because the people with the biggest dollars have the biggest influence in Congress. And that's why when you look at copyright, it's just going to be extended forever. Mickey Mouse is never going to go into the public domain. Why? Because Disney is very powerful and very rich. So every time, we get close to deadline, Disney goes and buys their politicians and says, hey, extend it another, decade or two. And I don't see any way that ever changes. No way.
I remember Jack Valenti and Sonny Bono both said they wanted copyright to last forever, less a day. And the interesting thing is that somebody put this in the PCAP, Paul Camp, there he is, good. He wants to turn copyright back to a limited period of 14 years. So funny thing is that number is in the Constitution. So if you're a constitutional originalist and you want to know what the founders wanted, they wanted 14 years and they put it in there. That's kind of interesting, because the originalists are the ones that basically sided with the industry in Eldred versus Ashcroft, which ended up, I think Larry Lessig and friends lost that one 7-2. But that gave us the indirect outcome of that, but a substantial one, was Creative Commons. And Creative Commons basically has been really useful in countless ways. So that gets me to another thing, which is, and this is where we met, is when you had the company Lindos, which later became Linspire, part of it became Linspire. And I was an editor for Linux Journal ended up being for 24 years until they got folded. And that was the first, and I think really the best effort to give us a Windows laptop, a Linux laptop, and I still have a Windows laptop somewhere. It was a great effort. So I'm wondering what your learnings were from that, because I think you understood something about the open source movement and what open source brought to the world that was more entrepreneurial than most people who were just programmers in it, which, full credit to them, made the world that we are in, but they made it as the builders, not necessarily as the business thinkers behind it. They wanted to make something that is useful to everybody, no matter what the particular purpose was, right? So give me a little bit of your thoughts about that and where that might even stand today. Where are you coming from on that? And your experience with that particular, thing.
So a few things that you talked about that I want to mention. One is that, to answer your previous question fully, any new system that is going to arise has to be completely divorced from the previous system. That's what I believe. There's no way to make the spaghetti out of DC be, fundamentally different. So my point is, things like Creative Commons, we're like, okay, I'm opting out of the old system and making a completely new system. That's the only way you're going to change. That's what we did at mp3.com, because we created this huge site, and then the major record labels say, okay, we want to play with you now that you have all these music fans. And I say, all right, give me a license to stream your songs. You don't want to make them downloadable? Fine, make them streamable. And they're like, okay, well, we can only give you a license for the United States. I'm like, well, screw that. Then, that's not how the internet works.
The internet's worldwide.
Exactly.
It doesn't work.
And they said, but we've sub-licensed it to all these other countries. And I'm like, dude, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
When you get past that, come talk to me. And guess what? They figured it out. And guess what? They also figured it out on YouTube.
Yeah.
And why did they figure it out? Because the business pressure was so much that even though they had this huge legacy system, like, all right, screw it, we got to figure out how to give YouTube a global license, otherwise we can't get our music up there. And this is why you have to create like a totally new system that opts out of the old baggage of the old if you want to fundamentally change something. So just to give you a better answer to that, the second thing I mentioned about copyright terms, hey, patents last for like 14 years, drug patents, and there's drug companies that still make a lot of money and figure out how to make it work. So I think that the notion that it has to be, life of the author plus, 50 years or whatever is a little absurd. One more comment, then I'll get to the new question. Is I see in the chat that says, in all fairness to UMG Universal Music, Albie Gluten and team advised differently. It was Vivendi that crashed the mp3.com car. Well, I'm sure there's probably some truth to that, but Albie Gluten, that guy, I got a great story for him. So early in mp3.com, right? I'm running mp3.com. We're this little renegade. We hadn't raised any money. And the Grammys Association, NARAS, has this event on digital music up in Los Angeles. And my buddy calls me up and says, hey, you should be on it. You're like digital music. You're mp3.com. You're the thing. And I look at the panelists, and it's all record label people that weren't doing anything in digital music, right? So I call up the guy and I say, hey man, you should let us, you should let me talk. And he's, oh, it's too late. We've already, set the panelist. All that was a lie. I was just a pariah of the industry because I was MP3. And he goes, I'll let you ask one question after the break. The first question, yeah, that can be you. So I go up there, and he did. He let me ask the first question, and I get up and I give a quick little speech about, MP3 was going to change the whole world, but it's actually a positive thing for the music industry. And afterwards, Albie Gluten, who I didn't know who he was, right? I mean, he's long, gray-haired guy, gets in my face and just is so vicious and so mean to us and to me personally every time. The guy actually is a musical genius. I saw this documentary. I can't remember. It was like on, I'm sure maybe somebody in the chat saw it. It was on the Bee Gees or something. And he was literally one of the first guys that was taping together tape to make, mixes and loops. But he was taping together reel to reel tape. So he's a musical genius, by the way, Albie Gluten. But I'm not convinced he knew anything about digital, but that's just my view. Anyways, the question was about Lindos. And so I had this big success with mp3.com. So I'm looking around and I love challenges, right? So I'm like, well, what's the biggest, richest company in the world? It's Microsoft. And so I think I have a duty as a person who's made some money and had some success to challenge Microsoft. Because they were like, if you took Google and Facebook and combined them, that's how, dominant Microsoft was in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I said, I got to compete with them. And the way to do it is to use Linux. I had used Linux at mp3.com in our backend. And everyone said, oh, that'll never work. You have to hire Oracle and you have to do SQL. And we were doing MySQL and Linux. And that gave us such an enormous cost advantage, that I was like, oh, this is fantastic. And all the experts like, oh, it'll never scale. And they were totally wrong. So I knew Linux had kicked ass in the back in the server, but hadn't done jack in the front office, in the end desktop. So I'm like, let's make a desktop Linux. And that's what I did with Lindos. And Linux had a big problem though. It's impossible to install software. You have to like type a million commands and stuff. It's ridiculous. So I'm like, we got to make it like one click easy. And so we built the first app store, visual app store, where you would just go shop and you're like, oh, I need a word processor. Oh, I need a spreadsheet, and click, boom, download.
It was a great
install.
app store. It was a
Oh, it was
killer
fantastic.
app store. It really was.
Yeah. And so what we did, which was unique, I don't want to overstate our contribution here. There was this brilliant system called Debian, which it was a command line, a package system is what they called it. And so what we did is we put a graphical front end onto that to make it all point and click. So Did we build the first app store? Well, part of it, because we made it all visual, but behind the scenes of it, there was some open source brilliance that we were, standing on their shoulders. And so that's why I did Lindo's, because I thought I had a duty to the world. Cause I'm like, listen, if a guy like me who's made it isn't going to take on the giant, then who is? Right? Stop sitting around and complaining that Microsoft charges too much for, Windows XP or whatever. Go do something about it. And that's what we did. We created Lindo's. I'll tell you one funny story about that most people, I don't know if you guys know. Doc, I'm sure you know this. So we create Lindo's. And of course, I picked the name intentionally because we were taking Linux and making it point and shoot easy, putting a nice Windows experience on it. And I had studied computer interface design at UCSD. And so I knew all about Xerox PARC, and they were the real inventors of Windows and icons and mouse. It wasn't, Apple, and surely it wasn't Microsoft. And so I picked the name Lindo's, and I'm like, I'm going to put Microsoft in a box, because if they attack me, then they just put me on the map. And if they don't attack me, well, then listen, people are going to see Linux plus Windows, that's Lindo's, and they're going to be intrigued. And so Microsoft sued us. And they said, hey, you're infringing on our trademark for the word Windows. And I was like, that's preposterous, And so Microsoft sues me. They're the richest company in the world. The next week, my insurance company sues me, my own insurance company. Why? Because I went to my insurance company and said, hey, guys, I have insurance for this. I have trademark insurance. You guys have to defend me. And they looked at Microsoft and said, holy crap, this is the richest company in the world. We don't want to defend you. So we're going to sue you. And we're going to allege that you tricked us. And what they said is, they said, well, you knew you were going to get sued, and you went and got insurance, and you should have disclosed that you knew you were going to get sued. I'm like, I didn't know that I was going to get sued. And their analogy was, it's like if you sold somebody an old gas station where there was a big leaky, container, and all the ground was contaminated, and you didn't tell anybody. I'm like, wait a second. For me to get insurance, I had to give you my business plan, saying everything that I was going to do, including my company name. And you had all that information before, you took my money as a customer. And so if I knew I was going to get sued, why didn't you know I was going to get sued? Anyway, so I immediately was fighting a lawsuit from the richest company in the world, plus one of the biggest insurers in the world. And we won the lawsuit with the insurer. And then the Microsoft, we go all the way up to literally 1 week before trial. And when Microsoft first sued me, I had fought so much with the record labels. I was like, guys, I don't want to fight. Lawsuits suck. They take so much time. Just write me a check for 50 grand and I'll change my name. 50 grand, And they said, no, we were not going to do it. And they had put in trying to get a temporary restraining order to shut us down immediately. And they lost that to shut us down immediately. And so I went back to them and said, all right, guys, give me 250 grand. You lost your little, early trial balloon. So this judge might be seeing things a little more my way. Give me 250 grand. I'll change my name. I'll buy new business cards. And they said, no way. I said, all right, fine. So we keep fighting. Then we win another couple rulings. And I go back to Microsoft and I say, hey guys, give me $1 million and I'll change my name. Now these guys, this is the richest company in the world, so they were just stupid not to do it, but they didn't do it. I'm like, fine. So we continue to fight. Well, we end up deposing Bill Gates. Right. Wow. And here's a little bit of history. I hope I don't bore anybody with this, but when Microsoft came out with Microsoft Windows, if you recall, Apple sued them and said, you guys ripped us off. You took our interface and Windows and icons and mouse. You ripped us off, because the Mac OS was the king at that time of the graphical user interface. And Bill Gates gets deposed, and they asked him about that. And his what he says at the time is like, what are you talking about? Apple, you didn't invent this. There's Borland has a window products, and Sun has Solaris, which has a window interface, and Xerox PARC had it. All these people, there's so many Windows products out there. I can't even name them all. He literally said that. And we got the deposition tape. Fast forward to 2005 when we depose him and we say, hey, can you think of any Windows products? Nope. Windows XP was the first. We invented everything. And we were like, holy crap, this guy's going to get crucified if we go to trial. So 1 week before trial, I tell my guys, hey, reach out to Microsoft, tell them 20 million. If they give me 20 million, I'll change my name, case over. They got out their checkbook, wrote a check for 20 million, and we changed our name from Lindows to Linspire. So remember, they sued me, and then they gave me a $20 million, a check to change my name.
Well
so
done.
We weren't successful in making Linux a desktop experience. We weren't successful. My goal was to go, try to make Linux get, 20-30% market share when it came to laptops and desktops. And we were never successful in that. But we did make a lot of contributions to Linux. And even today, when you type and the little thing under your spelling says, oh, you typed that word wrong. My team at Windows wrote that and gave that to the Mozilla people to put in the browser. And that kind of made that more of an industry standard. So we contributed a lot to Linux. So I'm proud of what we did there, even though we didn't accomplish everything that we set out to do.
There's if people aren't aware of this, Linux isn't run by a foundation, but Linus Torvalds himself works for the Linux Foundation. The Linux Foundation is a substantial organization. The alpha funder of that is now Microsoft. I think Microsoft gives more money to that than anybody. And if you go to Bing, which is their search engine, that's running on Linux. They came around eventually, but it took a long time, and it was a lot of wasted time and money. They could have in the first place. And this kind of proves your point that you can't, no standing business wants to screw itself over in some way, even if they see the opportunity in it. They still want to, the urge to protect what they've got exceeds whatever sense of opportunity they have. But had they just taken Linspire or taken Lindows and said, great, here's a Linux version of this, see what happens. It would have been huge. It would have been huge, and it would have been way ahead of a game. But I have to tell people, that was a great little product. And the store especially, that really stood out for me because it was the easiest way to run Linux at the time. And I'm not sure it's ever been matched again exactly. Debian, which you mentioned earlier, which is the Linux distro you built that on, the biggest version of that is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is probably the leading Linux distro at this point. It's evolved quite a bit. Of course, Linux is in Android. It's certainly in everything at this point. But you're ahead of your time on that thing. And now I'm looking back through, because I'm mindful of time, of how much anything's going on in the chat that you haven't addressed. There's so much to talk about.
Somebody asked, did we have to license the name Lindows? No, we changed our name to Linspire, so we never licensed the word Windows from Microsoft. But one twist in all this is that they did have a trademark for just the word Windows. The U.S. Patent Trademark Office granted them, but it was so fascinating because we went looking at this. They applied for the trademark for the word Windows, not Microsoft Windows, just the word Windows 3 times. And it got rejected with blistering 20, 30-page rejection notices from the Patent and Trademark Office saying, it's in the dictionary, it's used by competitors, it is not eligible. And then the 4th time they applied for the trademark for the word Windows, it was approved with no comment.
Wow.
How does that happen? How does that happen? And so when we went to court, by the way, a trademark lawsuit is all about confusion, right? Like if you're Doc Searls and I say, well, I'm Box Searls, right? And people are confused. And so, they bought your product accidentally. We said we were the anti-Microsoft, so nobody was confused. But so that's normally what you're doing. You're fighting over, was somebody confused? Well, what we did was we said, well, it doesn't matter if people were confused. because your trademark is bogus. It should never have been granted, and we're going to blow it up so anyone in the world can use the word Windows for any purpose they want. And that was the bigger threat to Microsoft, right? And that's why they settled, because they were risking their Windows trademark. And so that was one of the big reasons they settled. May not have anything to do with Bill Gates having to testify and having said contradictory things. But anyways,
I see Damien, who's brilliant. He's a lawyer and a trademark lawyer. That it happens to the concept of acquired distinctiveness. That is it's probably not a rat hole, but not one we need to go down. We both know him, and he's great. This is an apocryphal story, probably. It was one of my favorite tech support stories where the person calls tech support and asks a question, and the tech support person says, well, first close all your windows, and then the customer gets up and walks around the house and closes all the windows in the house, which explains how completely generic a word that is. So we share a friend in, or at least an acquaintance in Don Norman, but you actually studied under him at UCSD. And for those not in California, that's UC San Diego. The UCs are four-letter acronyms. So did that have an influence on you? It certainly, I mean, he had a huge influence on me, and cognitive linguistics in general has had a big influence on me. More George Lakoff, which is another mentor in addition to him. But having studied under him, did that make a difference to you? Was that a part of your life back then, or is it just a weak connection that we might have?
It did. And I'll tell you why, because so I grew up really poor, and I worked like 35 hours a week going to high school. So when I graduated, I didn't have great grades, like 3.0 or 3 which is not even that good nowadays, because now it's like,
I had a 1.0. So
yeah, nowadays it's like on a 5.0 scale or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So I only got into UCSD barely by the skin of my teeth, and I couldn't do computer science, which is what I wanted to do, right? Because I didn't have the grades. So I looked around and I saw this new major called cognitive science. And it was a brand new department. And because it was a new department, they didn't have their own classes. So they made you take computer science classes and biology classes and psychology classes. And that's how they made the major before they had a department. So I'm like, brilliant. I've hacked my way into the computer science department because I can take the same classes as the computer science kids. And little did I know that what cognitive science, by the way, so it's a study of intelligence, right? And it's very broad, and you can think of it like, can I recreate it using computers? Maybe that's some AI type stuff, or can I examine the brain to figure it out? Or can I do tests on humans to figure it out? So sort of three big disciplines. And so what was fascinating about that was what cognitive science taught me, because it was so broad, was that I had to learn how to learn very quickly. So, I turned, blink, I'm 29 and I'm chairman and CEO of a NASDAQ traded public company. How do you learn how to do that? Right? Well, you got to be damn quick on absorbing information and adapting. And that's why I'm very appreciative of the cognitive science major that I took, because it was so multi-discipline. I'd be in a neurobiology class, and then you switch and you're in a data structures class in computer science, and then you're in a psych class. Like your brain has to really be pretty malleable to absorb all of that. So what I look back at my university experience, I learned how to learn. There was not like one particular thing I really like, well, I took this bit of knowledge and I grew it into a tree. No, I just learned how to learn. And with the changes that were happening so fast in the internet in the 90s and the 2000s, and I guess you could say it's still happening today, being able to be very flexible and learn was really the key, I think, to a lot of my business success.
It's interesting that you remind me. I'm going to not give his name, but there's a guy I know who he's from the UK, and he invented something that very early web that did sports, and he was kind of screwed over in much the same way that you were, but kind of came out of it with a learning that, oh my gosh, I can make money doing this. He dropped out of school and did nothing but programming for the next few years, And on a lark, he applies to a whole bunch of good schools in the US. And he gets into Harvard mostly because he was weird. And he goes there and realizes, I can't succeed at this exactly because I'm not prepared at all. But he he examines all the different teachers and finds one who's very entrepreneurial, and day one goes in there and pulls him aside and says, I want to go into business with you, with this guy, and does. He ended up doing that while he was at school. So it's gaming the system. Somebody wrote back here, your genius is gaming the system. I think it's also seeing systems that aren't there. I mean, I think it's a really important point that, in the incumbents aren't the ones you rely on to make the big changes. I mean, there's a book out there about Jack Welch right now, and the harm that he did as well as the good that he did. There's a celebration of CEOs of giant companies that I think is misplaced because, look at the internet itself. The internet was a Trojan horse for the incumbents, for the cable companies and for the phone companies. They never would have invented the internet that we have. They would have, because as a friend of mine who was the chief scientist at British Telecom puts it, JP Rangaswamy is his name. He said, our core competency is not telecommunications, it's actually billing. We're a billing company. And the internet was not built for billing at all, So what did all the giant companies do once all this TCP/IP traffic is going on? They couldn't find a way to bill each other, so they just said, screw it, we're gonna peer. And peering is what made the internet happen. It's sort of like, okay, we're just gonna pass this traffic through. But it was a Trojan horse that ended up being the entire business, right? Like Microsoft became a Linux company, the cable companies are becoming internet ISPs, the phone companies are becoming the same thing in a different way. So I want to talk about another thing. I don't know where we stand on time, so I'm sort of looking at Tom and the thing, but where he gives me a thumbs up so we can rock on. We share, I don't know if you have a love of radio, but I grew up as a radio freak. My tech background is like the joke I tell is the only code I know is Morse. So as a ham radio operator as a kid for a while. But I grew up in New Jersey looking at the New York skyline across a forest of AM radio towers. That was my view out my bedroom window. And the biggest was WABC, this top 40 station at the time, which you could get in the toaster and hear in the gutters walking past the house. I mean, it was that we're in a very RF rich area. And it strikes me now that radio as we knew it, broadcast radio, not just like TV, like broadcast TV is who actually watches an antenna anymore? What's the point of that? And cable's kind of going the same way, where premium subscription TV seems to be the main way to go at this point. That's where all the quality is. And with radio, we get to the optionality thing again. I have Sirius, okay, in the car. We have Sirius XM in the car, and came with the car. We kept the subscription. I already had one, but I listen to their app. Why do I listen to their app even in the car? Because I could do more with the app than I can with this steady stream. Because if I hear a podcast, I can I'm just gonna if that's also a podcast, I'm just gonna go over here where I can stop it and start it and jump over the ads and the rest of it. That's the maximized optionality we were talking about earlier. So I'm wondering what you think happens. How many more years do you give radio as we know it before they turn the transmitters off and just do everything over the net?
I think they'll limp along for another decade or two, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they'll limp along. But music radio is dead. The royalty structure is unsustainable. So all the music radio initiatives, even migrated online, the economics don't work. So you simply cannot generate enough advertising revenue to support music radio. So I think
what you pay to do music radio, yeah.
Yeah, it has to, the subscription services of the world will just displace all music radio as we know it. Now the talk radio, sports and politics and stuff, that will continue on, and is continuing on, right? I mean, it's in lots of forms, from the clubhouses of the world to podcasts to, I think they've taken over the talk radio world now. It may not be called radio, but I would contend that, if that they've surpassed the traditional talk radio business.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
just the YouTube channels of the world and the podcasts and the clubhouses and there's so many, media outlets now.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as I have maybe those of you watching in the background there, I can't see it, but over there's a little stack of radios. And I actually take a radio with me when I travel and so forth. So I'm just curious to know what's going on there. And as a percentage of all the stuff that I can get with podcasting and with music streaming, and with your radio app as well. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that just completely sidelines one of these things. I mean, it's so retro. My son, who's now 25, when he was 15, and we took an apartment in New York, we went to buy a radio at Radio Shack on 181st Street. It's now closed. The Radio Shack itself is gone. They didn't have any radios there. And he asked me on the way back, very naively, but I think very tellingly, he asked me, what's the point of range and coverage? Why do these matter? Because I get all these stations on the internet. There's one at Emerson College that did WERS, which did a cappella music on the weekends, and he was in an a cappella group and he liked a cappella, so he listened to them, but he wasn't in their coverage area, right? Because he just got it on a phone, or he got it on his laptop. So what's the point of range and coverage? And to me, that's the telling thing in the long run. The thing that's happened really in the last few years, very recently, is we can assume ambient connectivity. Bob Frankston, who was the co-inventor of the spreadsheet with VisiCalc 30, 40 years ago, whatever it was, it calls it that, ambient connectivity. We assume ambient connectivity. Even you go to a hotel now, your phone is getting better than whatever the hotel Wi-Fi is that they want to charge you money for if you want to get a faster version of it. You're getting 50, 100 down and 10 or 15 up, and it's working better. So as long as you're within cell coverage, you're covered. And there's just a zillion things you can get and do, which is just this vast new territory. But it's still the bigs it kind of gravitates toward the big controlling companies. But I'm actually wondering what's going to obsolesce Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music and all of those, and even YouTube, right? I mean, I don't think anything is fixed. I don't think anything is done. There's a tendency at all times to think that's the case. But you're one of the few people I know that will look at the status quo and say, what's completely wrong with this, and how can we get past that with something new? So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what will even 10, 15, 100 years from now change with those things?
Predicting the future is a pretty tough game. I would suggest that the way I think about it is people's listening habits and have to change, and when they change, then that will displace the incumbents. So as long as people, sort of, here's my music collection, I want to listen to music, here's a list of songs that I want, as long as they have that lens that they're looking through, Spotify and Apple Music are going to dominate. But what is intriguing is that, look at TikTok. It's fantastic. I mean, I just saw a stat that now people use TikTok 25 hours a month. So they spend more time on TikTok than they do on YouTube. So what you have is like a totally new user experience.
Right.
And so as user experiences change, that's what's going to be the motivation for totally new services to bubble up. Because I also saw that TikTok now has more monthly users than Google. That's unbelievable. With Google and their Google search engine and Gmail, I mean, it is unbelievable to me, right? If you told me to bet on that, I would say, you probably read it wrong.
Does that include China? I imagine it includes China, and I'm not sure Google is there in China. Are they? I don't even know.
It might. I don't know, but forget it's definitely the trend line, right?
Right.
And if it's not today, it's tomorrow, and that's something that people didn't predict. Just the shorter, granular media consumption that is happening. And so I think like looking for the new trends, that's what's going to displace Spotify. It's not a different music service that has a better playlist feature or, something like that.
It's also production. It's like everybody's a producer now. That's the cool thing about TikTok, right? Anybody looks at that and says, wait a minute, I could do that too. It's not that hard. And another interesting thing to me about that is that TikTok changed the norm in the way we orient our video from horizontal to vertical, from
That's so true.
landscape
Yeah,
to
that's so true.
portrait. And an interesting thing I discovered, actually, I was at a little concert and I recorded something with it's old now, an iPhone 11. And I didn't realize this. Most people don't know this, I think, that an iPhone has stereo microphones, has two. And it sounds pretty damn good when you listen back on headphones, not necessarily on speakers, but on headphones. But I don't know how it works when you turn it vertically. I mean, you get much better spread of sound from up to down. I don't know if it goes from side to side, or maybe with the new thing they do with Dolby or something, they figure that out. But it's interesting to me that, I mean, as human beings, actually, we're vertical things. We stand upright. We are portrait mode in the way we operate in the world. We're, diurnal animals that walk upright on the standing monkeys, right? That's what we are. And what TikTok has done is sort of normalize the way we make video to that, rather than to the old cinema model, which is, we have a landscape and we're looking at a sound stage, which is a horizontal thing. It's really interesting. And mobility is another thing, because and it's something I learned from, our friend Don Norman, among others, that the way we understand the world is as moving things, right? Birth is arrival, death is departure, choices are crossroads, careers are paths. These are all metaphorically, we're traveling animals, right? Well, that's right, left. That's not necessarily up, down, right? So the next thing might be something that takes us back to a horizontal view rather than a vertical view. It's just going to be interesting to see how that goes. Somebody wrote
I would suggest that Snapchat actually
they probably
pioneered
predated
the
that.
vertical.
That's right.
But
They did.
But they weren't able to move the world, right? They maybe moved the young crew, and maybe that was the next generation that really embraced TikTok. But I remember hearing from Evan, who's their CEO, about, hey, you're doing it all wrong. Turn your phone like this when you record. That was the first time I heard that.
That
TikTok
totally makes
has
sense.
definitely changed that. Yeah.
So I was at this wedding I was at last weekend. It was a very ceremonial one. There's a Hindu version in the morning and there's a Christian version in the afternoon. And everybody there spent the entire time on their rectangles, whatever they were, and holding their rectangles up. And they were photographing it. None of them were photographing it horizontally. All of them were photographing it vertically. Mm-hmm. And what they do with it afterwards is they share it, and then it's over. I mean, we looked at media as archival for a long time. And part of what's happened with the streaming, for example, I don't need to archive all my music. It's all archived for me by somebody else. It's not even my music. Now I'm in compliance with the record companies. Well, I never owned it in the first place, it turns out. I own containers for it. The containers are dead. So they're back in the business again of streaming this stuff to us rather than giving us a container to play it from. But it was interesting to me that all of us were extended by these rectangles that we hold aloft. I do photography, so I'm shooting pictures of this and titling them the ceremonial raising of the phones at the wedding reception, right? Because everybody's got their phone up there. And then the TikTok cool thing is that what TikTok spoke to is the look at this part of human nature, right? Which is, we want to do this. This is why we wrote on cave walls, right? It's you want to see this. Look, this is what a bison looks like. I got it right here, and that's part of our nature as well, right? And maybe what all tech yearns to do is get us back to some hunk of nature that is part of what we are as human beings. And there's so much more that we have hardly even touched on yet.
Doc, let me ask you one quick question. What
Sure.
motivates you?
Wow.
Why do you get up? Why do you do this interview with me? Why do you comment on the pho list? Why do you do what you do?
There's a funny answer, which is which is not true, but it's just a great answer, which is an early Onion headline in like 1995 was titled "Error Found on Internet," right? So there's a tendency in all of us to want to like say, "Oh, I was wrong," or "That was right." I must never say anybody's wrong, but um, I I think I share. I project that I'm sharing this with you, but I'm very fascinated by business, and I'm very fascinated by tech, and I'm very fascinated by the internet and what, like, and Debbie Newman's in on this too. We're both part of a cabal that thinks that we live in a digital world now, and we're digital beings. We're not just physical beings anymore. We are digital beings, and that is new to human experience. We are now I mean, in 1981 was when they filmed Blade Runner. The very first thing you see in Blade Runner is Los Angeles, November 2019, right? And it's this dark dystopia where it's always raining, and there are off-world colonies, and yet there are payphones and and display terminals that have vacuum tubes, and yet if you told us in 1981 that we would all live in a world where we are zero distance from each other at no cost, that's a miracle on the order of loaves and fish, maybe even beyond that. What we're doing right now, we are all zero distance from each other. You and I are together. We're looking at each other. All these people are participating in this. We could be anywhere in the world. That is different. That is, there's so much opportunity in that, and there's so much profound change that comes with that. And on the business side, what I think, and this is what gets me up in the morning, I think that the only way that we solve lots of business problems is from the customer side, not the consumer, but the customer. I think that the customer base for companies generally knows more than the company does. There's so much intelligence that can go from us to them. We can, one of the first things my wife said when we had the internet in our house in 1995, her sister was the first controller for Netscape. She was like employee number 4 at Netscape when that mattered. And so suddenly we're like a Netscape household, and we saw e-commerce for the first time. And my wife said, "Why can't I take my shopping cart from site to site? I want my own shopping cart." We don't have it yet. And why don't we have that? Nobody's looking at it from the customer side. Everybody wants to do how can we improve whatever crap we have on the business side? And nothing wrong with that. I think it's great, but I think there's so many problems. Loyalty, demand, advertising is wickedly inefficient. If I need, like, I needed a camera for this wedding, I want to be able to advertise myself what I need without giving up any personal information about myself, and rather than all just look through Google or whatever to find, or even Amazon to find what I want. I'll do credit to Amazon. Amazon got me the camera I needed in less than the time they promised, and hats off to them. They're fabulous. But we can do better. We can do better by starting on the customer side. Not entirely, but and it's interesting to me that, and I don't want to get into politics, but it's very hard for people on the left to understand what business does. It's just like a blind spot, and that's roughly the entirety of the academic world, which is where I work, right? And that's not a knock. It's just an interesting thing. The answer is policy. What is the question? But the answer can't be just what business does by itself. That's not the whole answer either, because customers are part of business as well. So I'm just really excited about what customers can bring. So that's why I'm at Indiana University right now. This is the university, or like a group of people here who read the stuff that I've written and said, we want to support that. Whatever research or stuff you want to do around that, come here and work on that. So that's what I'm doing. And that gets me up in the morning. That's what gets me up and participating in stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. It's good to see you.
Oh, it's good to see you
I
too.
appreciate your early support of Lindo's too, by the way. That was impactful. I still remember that to this day. When you have this crazy idea, Lindo's, and we can compete with Microsoft, those early supporters, those early believers, those really matter. right? And I probably never thanked you for that.
Oh, you did,
But
and it was
let me do
great.
that
Yeah.
now.
Well, an interesting thing is that as a journalist, of course, writing for Linux Journal at that time, but as a journalist in general, I've never been good at being a critic. I don't want to be a critic. I think being a critic is really not necessarily constructive. I mean, somebody goes to the trouble to do something really new and original, and I want to find out what's behind that. What makes that tick? What can I do to help? You know, my mother taught, both my parents really, but when I was a kid, because like you, I grew up, we didn't grow up poor, but we were in a town that was kind of lower middle class and lower class in some ways, but very blue collar, where you proved your worth by beating somebody else up in a fight, quite frankly, you know. Um, and my mother said to me, well, your choice is always to help or to hurt. How do you help? How do you, you know, you don't have to hurt people. And a lot of journalism is about hurting, actually. It's about,
Mhm.
it's playing gotcha. You know, all gossip journalism is pretty much that. It's playing gotcha. Um, what I wanted to do, I went back just while we were talking here. I looked at myself in Linux Journal um, and Lindo's, and I found a couple things. I stuck it in the chat. I didn't actually read them, but I remember where I was coming from at the time in 2003 was literally, how can I help these guys? You know, I mean, they're
Yeah.
doing a cool thing here. I mean, you put on a show. You had a conference in Del Mar, someplace on the
Yeah.
coastal California, and it was a great little conference, you know, and I just had a great time there, you know, looking at what people brought to that table. I mean, you set the table and you invited people to bring more stuff to the table. That's what anybody who puts on a conference does. I mean, I got a table here, bring stuff here, and let's look at it and let's show it off. That's why I loved going to CES for many years, and to Comdex before that, and other things like that. I mean, that's what excites me is, you know, what are people bringing to the table? You know, and my own personal angle on it right now is, what do customers bring to the table? And the table is the internet. The table is not a platform. I think platforms themselves may be an obsolete idea to some degree. Why should we always have platforms? You know, I mean, when I started out on the internet, I had my own, I mean, I had an ISP that gave me 16 IP addresses. And so I ran my own, and I'm not that technical even, but I had my own mail server. I had my own web servers. My website was there, Searls.com, which I still have, which I bought. You don't really buy domain names, you rent them, but I started renting that one in 05, I think, 95. And, but that was a server. It was a server under my desk, you know, and I moved it to a closet when it heated my feet too much, you know, and it ran on a, you know, actually had a wireless link over something crazy called Ricochet in for a while in the Bay Area, of a failure that was a great teaching thing toward where wireless is now. So anyway, that's sort of where I'm coming from as a journalist as well. I want to kind of help out. Sort
Cool.
of my
Well,
angle.
thanks, Tom. I know we're about out of time, so
Guys, I hate to do this. We are, but I could let this one go on for hours. This has been absolutely fascinating, and absolutely, you guys are the smartest people in the room. I knew you would be. I love it when I'm right about these things. This was a dream team matchup pairing. Well done by both of you.
I've always enjoyed following Michael. I'm glad we finally got a chance to talk after a few years. This is great.
Outstanding.
Yeah, I've been a fan for a long time.
Michael, it was such a pleasure to get to know you and your history. And I did put a comment in there. I said, one of your superpowers is figuring out how to game the system, and good on you, man. I love these stories. So please keep innovating. I hope you've got many, many more years in front of you doing this. To the audience, you got rewarded big time today. So good on you for recognizing that today was going to be worth your lunch money. Folks, that's it. Hope to see you out here soon again. Keep on keeping on.
Thank you. Thank you. I just hit save the chat. I'm glad
Thanks,
you allowed
Tom.
that.
You got
Bye-bye.
it.
Okay, take care, guys.